Jane Cho is a powerhouse. In this riveting and unafraid conversation, it becomes crystal clear why she is one of the most sought after executive coaches in the business world today. She tasks us with stepping into the unknown spaces, the complex spaces, and claiming who we are. She reminds us that the barometer for success is tied to how emotionally, spiritually attuned and aligned we are. She leaves us with a final message that our work on the earth is to clarify our own stories so that we can share our energy and our gifts with the people around us. Thank you, Jane, for sharing your gifts, which are immense, with us today. Hello, and welcome to another installment of At the Podium with me, Patrick Huey. At the Podium is a platform where we will learn from people who come from different walks of life, careers, and experiences, but all share one thing in common. They have stepped fully into the transformative power of saying yes to the unexpected turns of their lives, and they are now using the power of their voice or podium to make an impact on the world we live in today. At the Podium is the intersection of art, culture, and big thoughts wrapped up in good old-fashioned conversation. Today, I'm thrilled and humbled to share the podium with Jane Cho. Jane is an executive coach, consultant, and facilitator. For over 12 years, she has helped people and organizations build inclusive cultures that are welcoming to all individuals. She has worked with organizations of all sizes in multiple industries, from large global companies, startups, nonprofits, to colleges and universities, film studios, media, and entertainment. Jane, welcome to At the Podium.
Hi, Patrick. Thank you so much for having me.
How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm great. We're at the last moments of summer, so I'm just trying to enjoy it.
I am so glad to talk to you today. And you and I have been friends for years. And I feel like today is going to be a continuation of a long dialogue that you and I have shared for 2 decades, which is beautiful if you think about it. So Jane, you have created quite a career for yourself as an executive coach, as a consultant, and you've carved out this space in leadership development and diversity, equity, and inclusion. But in a previous iteration of your life, you had built a very accomplished career as an actress. You worked extensively in Hollywood, in theater. You have a degree from the Yale School of Drama. You also have a degree in performance studies from Northwestern. I want to know, because we talk about these transition moments for people, how did that journey unfold for you from this very vibrant theatrical career to this space where you are literally transforming companies from the inside out?
I always feel like each path dovetails into another and they're simultaneous, right? You're never only on one path at a time. I think that was really true for me, where I started in the arts and in performance when I was a kid. I started singing professionally when I was around in 4th grade. My family was very into the arts, and I went to a public school, and my music teacher in 4th grade invited me to audition for this choir. And then I performed in this choir, and then I got invited to record these records. I was very active in the arts with music. In high school, I was in all of the clubs, theater and all of that. And then I went to college. And so during all of that, I never had a singular kind of goal of becoming an actor per se. I was always just kind of following my immediate interest. And when I graduated from college, I went right into the theater. I got my first job actually with Malik Pancholi. He was in my class at Northwestern. We both got hired our senior year of college at the Goodman Theater. So during all of that time, I felt like I was never just doing one thing. It was always one path and then these kind of other things that were happening at the same time. And I think part of what has always served me is just following your interests, staying engaged and staying interested, keeping your eye on the ball in terms of having goals and having a vision for what we want in life, but not being too laser focused in a way that blocks out other things that also can be very rejuvenating, very engaging. And I feel like that's a way that my career organically evolved from one thing to the next. And even now, I feel like I'm not just doing one thing. And if you have to kind of write down what you do, we're sort of asked to narrow it down so that it's legible and people can place you in a context that they can understand. But, in the way that we have one way we do something, there are other spaces that we're also very active and very accomplished and very comfortable, but maybe it doesn't match up or make sense with other parts of our lives. So I think we tend to compartmentalize our own selves. What has helped me is to really question that impulse. Do I have to compartmentalize myself? Do I have to define, or can I be in a flow with something that's working for me, that I enjoy, that's engaging, where I'm finding success, and also still do these other things that might feel a little tangential, from a narrative perspective, but bring me great meaning and joy and accomplishment. So I think that has helped me evolve through all of the different phases of life, because I think there's a complexity that life demands that I think, especially when we think about our careers or work, we're not always able to embrace all of that. And I think there's a lot of power in saying, you know what, I think I'm going to see if I can embrace the complexity and see what happens.
When we were studying together, we had a really fabulous movement teacher named Wesley Fada, who is an icon in the Yale community and taught everyone who came through that program until he recently retired. And I remember one day he said to us, your career is something that you can really only experience in the rearview mirror. As you're moving through your life, as you're moving through the ups and downs and the turns that happen to you, the career is what is the result. It's not the process. I think what you're saying is that you've sort of been able to really embrace these different concepts of who you are, where your interests lie, and really go down that path of the process and let the results kind of fall as they may fall. Is that where you are on that?
I think it has to be a simultaneous attention where there's a really strategic aspect of your own career development, your goal setting, the things that you do to move your quote unquote career forward. I think that's really important. And there are really tactical things that we all can do to drive ourselves toward accomplishing those goals. At the same time, there's an undercurrent while we're doing that, while we're pursuing our career goals, while we're putting the work in to develop ourselves and all of those important things. There's an undercurrent of an energy, a feeling, a sense that we have that we can't control it as much, right? And I think that's related to things like, does this feel good? Do I like this? And I think the ability to always stay in touch with that presence, that mindfulness, that access to yourself is going to inform whether or not we're going to make certain strategic choices about our career. So very practically, it can be like, okay, do I like my job? Am I happy in my job? That's a very tactical, strategic question. And we can look at all of the plot points around that. Like, do I like my day-to-day? Do I like my manager? Do I like the people I work with? All of those questions. But I think we can have a sense of, okay, is this satisfying? Does this really fill me up in the way that I need to be filled up in a deep, meaningful way versus, okay, I'm doing this job so that I can get this stuff so I can do life. Again, those things are important, but we have to also keep in mind the more emotional, spiritual, intuitive part of ourselves that help us know if we're on track with our lives. And that's more unwieldy, I think. And I think when Wesley talks about this idea of our career, that can often be the result, what you write down that you already did. And that never necessarily helps us know what to do next. As an executive coach, I work with a lot of very successful people who feel like, yeah, I did that. That was cool, but now what should I do next? And we realize past success doesn't necessarily give us the meaning and the sense of purpose that's going to help us know what to do next. It's great. I mean, success is very important, and I don't want to undermine that in any way, but life is whole and complex. So we need to attend to all pieces of it so that we, at the end of the day, feel like we're really in flow with what we came here to do.
It's interesting because you have always had an incredibly expansive view of the world and of your life and how you exist within that. But a lot of people walk through with a sense of, well, I went to drama school. I'm supposed to be an actor. I'm now an actor. And if I haven't been successful in that and I go do something else, I failed. Because we're very label attached in the role that we live in. And we're very defined by, well, I did this, so therefore I must continue doing this, or I must continue being that. And then the shift happens. So When you're coaching people, how do you manage the shift? Because that's the heart of the matter.
I think it's mindset is a big starting point. I think the notion of failure and success is a real hindrance for a lot of people. We are terrified of failing. We're ashamed, and we feel all these big emotions about the fear of failure or being labeled a failure or seen as a failure, all of that stuff. And it's such a hindrance because there's always going to be a story that someone tells you about yourself. You're going to be told a story about who you are, right? From the day we're born, you're told, okay, this is what you are. This is what you can expect in life. This is what you deserve. This is what's for you. This other stuff is not for you. This is not you. This is not your path. And that is all nonsense. I think we have to first listen most closely to our own story about ourselves. And we have to get very clear about what stories have I inherited? What stories have been transmitted to me? What's like the bag of stuff someone gave you that you're still holding? That you're like, oh, this is not mine. We have to go through a process of deciding, do we want to still carry some of the stuff that was given to us? It doesn't belong to us. And if we don't, put it down. And I think notions of success and failure are hugely tied up in all of that. So I think even the notion of a shift, we can think of that, we can even problematize that. Because if we think of it as a shift, it's like, you're on track A and then you got to jump the track and go on track B. And another way to think about it is just that there are multiple concurrent tracks. You're always on more than one track at a time. And they're always there and accessible and yours for the taking. And it's just a matter of choosing, okay, which one do I want to prioritize right now? And I always feel that you have to check in with that internal barometer. Okay, is this true for me? What track resonates with my truest self, with my most important, urgent goal and value? And when we think about changing the plot of our lives, like even things like changing your career, changing your job, changing your lifestyle, changing something major about how you live your life, we have to really go down deep and use that compass of what's the core value that animates your life. That I think can help make the more tactical decisions. Like, for example, I work with a lot of women who are trying to balance parenting and career. Oftentimes, those two roles are in competition, right? So if you think about the multiple tracks available at once, for myself personally, I have 2 children. Being a parent is as important as having a career to me, right? So these are these 2 different tracks that are happening at the same time, that I am on at the same time. So I can't like jump from one to another back and forth. It's exhausting. I think a lot of fathers and mothers are really struggling with that. And we're in a moment where all of these things are being reconsidered and reexamined. Part of a way to think about change in your life is to see if we can think of it in a way where we don't have to pick one over another or sacrifice something in order to gain something else, but rather, how can we have a more holistic, more integrated, a more reasonable way of being in the world where we don't have to pick only one priority in our lives? Because I think we can do more than one thing at a time. But I think making those decisions has to be deeply rooted in our own core value system.
What's really interesting about the approach that you're taking and the approach that we're taking in this conversation today, Jane, is that many of the other people I've spoken to have talked about this sense of shifting, this transformative power of saying yes in an either or scenario. And what you're really talking about is this idea of there can be unity.
Yeah.
And that it's not necessarily a break, it is a unifying experience to go from one direction to another direction. And that potentially you've been doing that all along.
Yeah.
And you may be foregrounding something based upon the given circumstances of your life, your family.
Absolutely. When we think about healing or growth, you can't amputate your way into healing or growth. We can't remove something or like chop something off or cut something off in order to be whole or to grow. It's a mindset shift where instead of deciding, okay, we're going to give all of that up and do this other new thing. No, I think we have to see that, there's a reason why we've maybe held things that are in conflict in our lives. I think a lot of us struggle with a certain level of internal conflict. We want this one thing, but we kind of also want this other thing, and they feel like they're in conflict. And that might very well be true. Like you can't always do every single thing you want. Sometimes you do have to prioritize certain things, foreground certain things, and then deprioritize and like put other things in the background. That's reality. Where we can kind of get in our own way is when we start telling that secondary storyline of, well, since I'm putting this other thing in the background, I'm a bad person, or I'm failing, or I'm letting everyone down, or, whatever negative narrative that we have associated with making those shifts, or reshuffling your deck, putting different things in the first position. The other way that we might get a little more spaciousness around how we think about our lives and how we can make decisions is that it's not a permanent decision forever. Like for me as a parent, I knew that when I had my kids, I really wanted to be a parent in a certain type of way that was more time intensive than in the way that I grew up. So I knew, okay, I'm not going to be able to be on the road 3 months a year. I don't want to be in a career where I'm going to be out of town a lot, or that I won't be able to attend parent teacher conferences and school plays and all of those things. So I knew I'm going to have to reshuffle a little bit, because that role as a parent, especially when my kids were 0 to 5, I wanted to be there. So that parenting role and responsibility was in first position. That didn't mean that I couldn't do the other things I wanted to do, but I was able to figure out a way where I could still stay true to my core values, to what was most important to me, without amputating anything or leaving everything behind. There's a way that you can find some sense of wholeness without feeling like you have to give something up completely.
Did that surprise you that you made that choice from 0 to 5 for your kids? We were kind of raised a little feral. Like they were like, here's the key. Don't turn on the stove. I'll see you when I get home.
Yeah. We were like Gen X, child of immigrants. It was like, I'll see you at 7 o'clock. You're going to go to school, right? Okay, get on that. That's the bus, right? Yeah. So it was just a different time. It was a different context. I always kind of knew that intuitively. That was something that I wanted. And when I had my kids later in life, in my late 30s, I had my first child. I knew that there was a certain type of parent I wanted to be. And it was difficult because, to be very honest, it was not intuitive for me. It was definitely something that I had to think about, put a lot of effort in. I read a lot of parenting books. It was an intentional decision to deprioritize career progress, career success, not success necessarily, but, I wasn't like hitting the gas on my career as much during those first 5 years of my kids' lives, because I knew I wanted to still be working and still be developing my career. But I was also very, very focused on being home with my kids.
The word that keeps coming into my mind, is it gradualism? Is it the idea of things in their place at the right time? It's more about patience and priority.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think that as people think about where they currently are, the present moment of their lives, and where am I? Where am I? What's happening? What am I doing? Keeping in sight a goal, what's the direction I want to go in? What's required for me to move in that direction? It doesn't have to be an all or nothing question, right? You don't have to sell all your stuff, quit your job. It doesn't have to be that way. And I think psychologically, we feel that we do, because there's some notion in our mind about commitment and being all in on something. And I question that. If anything, I would invite people who are listening to question that. Do you feel you have to give everything up in order to have the life you want? I don't think you have to. Maybe you do. I don't know. But I would question that. Is there a way that you can move toward your goal without amputating something, without giving everything up? And sometimes actually the answer is yes, you do have to give everything up. I only ask that because we don't ask ourselves the question. There are certain things that you're going to have to give everything up. If this is a change you want to make, you are going to have to give everything up, but maybe not. And I think being judicious, thoughtful, intentional, mindful about how we're thinking about our lives, how we're thinking about the choices that we have, that's going to help us feel more free, feel more empowered, and not victimized and not trapped. And I think for all of us who've been enduring COVID, the horror that we've all experienced, that we're all currently still experiencing, this is a daily question. Is there a way that I can maintain sanity in my home, maintain balance, and yet still accomplish all the things that we need to accomplish? It's a continuous process of evaluation and choice. I think it will serve us to open up the frame, to just open up the way we're thinking about all of these givens that have been in place forever and a day, especially when we think about, some of the work that I do around diversity, equity, and inclusion, these historical powerful legacies, this inertia that touches practically every single thing in our lives, it's time to question those things. It's time to pause and question and try to reimagine something different. And I think, especially with diversity, equity, and inclusion, we're trying to work towards something that doesn't exist yet. So we need to be very, very creative, very bold, very courageous in the way we think about things, the way we question what's come down the chute up until this moment, and make bold, courageous, thoughtful decisions from a place of feeling empowered and trusting ourselves, because you can trust yourself.
Jane, you literally have just taken my breath away by something you just said. When you talk about sometimes you have to give up something to have the life that you want.
You do.
And I think that's the key for people who are in that moment of transition. Part of the process is the realizing I do have to give up something. And it may be everything.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's the fear that people have. It's that moment of like, I'm going to have to give up something, or there's going to be a significant change, or my life may look very different now because I have to make a different choice, which ties into your work in diversity, equity, and inclusion, because I think people are so afraid of that. But I think people are really afraid of it because we don't know.
Yeah.
And who's going to be giving it up?
I think the question also is make sure you're giving up the right thing.
Right.
It's not realistic to imagine that everything can stay the same and you can get a totally different result, right? That's part of change. Like things do become less prioritized. They might fall away. But I think part of what I'm really speaking to is make sure you're giving up the right thing, right? Make sure you have a clear and correct analysis of your current state. I think especially when we think about career change, there's specific things that we fear to give up. And I think having a clear understanding of what that is can help us wade through the emotionality of these types of decisions. Like, are you afraid of giving up your salary? Are you afraid of giving up security? Are you afraid of giving up your identity as whatever that might be? Especially, we see ourselves as a certain type of person. For me, I still consider myself an actor. I am an actor. I will always be an actor because that is my training. That's my love. That's my passion. Currently, I'm not making my living as an actor, but that doesn't negate or diminish my identity as an artist, as a creative person, as an actor. And that is completely connected to the process of reclaiming your own narrative. You cannot let someone else tell you who you are ever, because They don't know. They don't know. First of all, they don't know you. Second of all, they don't know. And also, we were living in a historical context where 50 years ago, you and I would probably not be able to sit here talking about this, right? So we have that legacy that needs revision. We need to rebut some of that. We all internalize stories that are told to us about us that are not true. So I feel that the work of being here on this earth is to clarify your own story, to know yourself, to know why you're here, to know what you're doing, and to share your energy, to share your gifts. And if anyone's external story is messing with that, then just ignore that. That's a dumb story that doesn't have anything to do with you. You know your story. You get to write your story. You get to say what happens next. You get to decide how it ends to some extent. And, also there's a mystery, life is a mystery. So all of those things,
Jane, you're taking me to church right now because I think, you're speaking to my soul. I think it's the message that the world needs to hear right now, is that you don't get to decide other people's narratives and stories. You don't get to put you as your own individual person gets to decide who you are and how you exist in this world. You get to write your own narrative. And I think oftentimes we are hindered because we've allowed other people to define our narratives. And it's very hard to stand up and let that go. Because then what are you left with? Once you take away someone else's narrative, you are really responsible for what happens next.
So all that victimhood has to go. That sense of, they did it to me, somebody did it to me, no. Those things are real experiences of feeling disenfranchised. All those things are real. At the same time, we have agency. We have a private space that belongs to us, our own mind, that we are in charge of. That's ours. No one can take that. No one gets to take that. And I think being able to connect with that and to feel the power of that and to just practice that can help us as we navigate all of the change that we're all experiencing right now, and be guided by choices that are our choices, not what somebody else expects of us or wants us to do or is convenient for their story. I think something that can be hard is sometimes we've realized we've been cast in someone else's story of like, oh, you're wanting me to behave in this type of way because of your story about who I am. And a lot of times we just, by inertia or by other forces, we feel like, okay, I'll enact that role for you, for your story, for your convenience. And when that happens, we have to hit that pause button and be like, wait a minute, do I want to be part of that? And if you don't, sometimes it can be painful to remove yourself, and that can come in the form of certain negative relationships. If you have a negative dynamic with people in your life where they expect you to be a certain type of way, they're comfortable with you being a certain type of way. And if you don't want to be that way anymore, that's not going to be necessarily a welcome thing. So, part of the process is being prepared for that. No one's going to be that happy, but you can handle it. You can handle it. And I think the more empowered we are, the more centered we are in our own values, our own vision for our life, the more free we are. And that, I feel like that's the goal. We want to be free. You want to be free to talk to anyone you want, to go into any kind of space you want, confident and powerful in yourself so that you know why you're here and what you're doing, and that you're free to share the gifts that you have to give, because there's a lot of it. You've got a lot of gifts. Everyone does. To me, that's a beautiful and very humbling process to engage in.
I think it's wonderful that you're flipping the script on this conversation to where you're saying, yeah, all of this is hard. It's not easy. You got to make choices. You got to write your own narrative, take responsibility. But at the same time, it's beautiful.
It is. It's worth it. That's what I would say at the end of the day. And, I think something we have to think about that, I know I've thought about this a lot with COVID this last 18 months is, we all think we have a million years to figure it out, but we really don't. The story is written where there's an end point, like the clock is going to run out at some point. We don't know when. And so let's get started. Let's get started right now. Like, what are we waiting for? Like, what are we waiting for? Because we're not going to necessarily feel more comfortable tomorrow or the next day. I think this is urgent work. We're really all being called to question our priorities, our habits, the inertia that maybe we've been in. What is the stuff that we're carrying that no longer belongs to us, that isn't useful, that we don't even care about or like? It's time to get more focused on being more centered in our own vision for our lives and being responsible to that.
I'm just letting that sit for a moment.
Throw away your old stuff. We've enjoyed it. Now we can, let it flow. Let your life flow.
Jim, where do you get your inspirations for this type of work around self-examination, social justice, racial justice, equity? What inspires you to do that work? Because it's so important and it's so hard.
When I look back at all of the experiences I've had in my life, I can think of certain moments where I have felt alternatively really prepared and powerful in responding to things that were happening around me, and also totally powerless. I remember when I was a kid, my parents emigrated from Korea in the early 70s. We were like the only Korean family in our town. It was mostly a white town. And, just various incidents of, racism that I experienced, that my siblings experienced, that my parents experienced. And as a child, I knew something was happening, but I didn't know what to do or what to say. But there was a feeling of something is wrong here. I remember as I went through different experiences and as I got older, I would think, maybe I could say this. Maybe I should have handled it like that. Maybe there's a way that I could have changed something if I were older, if I were more mature, if I were more articulate or whatever, the way a child would think of how you could handle a situation like that. In all different stages of life, these moments happen. And I read a writer describe how she said that racism will find you where you stand. No matter, wherever you are, whoever you are, racism will find you where you stand, because this is the world that we live in. So when that happens, what are you going to do? Are you prepared to answer that? Are you prepared to respond to that? Whether you are the target, whether you are a bystander, whether you can be an ally, this dynamic that has always been in human history, and it's happening now. So I feel very inspired because I feel every single person has a part to play. Because again, whatever your identity, all of the inequalities that exist, racism, sexism, ableism, all of the ways in which we dehumanize each other, that will come to you and it will find you and it will meet you where you stand. So we each have an opportunity all the time to answer that moment. And so the work that I do, like, I'm so inspired for my own self in the work to more deeply understand that. Why do we have to be like that? I don't think we have to be so hateful or so fearful of each other, first of all. And then I think there are ways that we can move the needle, that we can educate ourselves and influence one another in love, in respect, and really just acknowledging each other's humanity first and foremost. And so in everything that I do and all the work that I do, that's at the heart of it. And, when I think about the theater or acting, isn't that really the first thing, to acknowledge another's humanity and their fullness as a human being, and all of the thoughts, feelings, desires, pain, all of the things that make a character, right? To be an actor is to try to embody and understand all of those things with empathy, to create a performance that the great performances really capture the fullness of that human experience. So to me, there's an integrity to all of that. And what I love about the work I get to do now is helping companies turn those practices into policies so that work is more welcoming, more supportive, and more successful. We have decades of data that show that companies that really get diversity, equity, and inclusion are more successful. They're more competitive. By all the metrics, they're far superior than the ones that are really operating on these outdated ways of doing business. So it's an exciting time to be in the conversation. It's so urgent because people's lives are at stake. It's time. Like, we have to move the needle in a meaningful way. And everyone has a responsibility to do that in their own way, in their own place, in their own context. And there's so much to be done. And I feel very, very passionate about making change while I get to be here.
Yeah. I'm taking it in because now is the time for all of it. If you're going to change your life, do it today. We're going to have healthier institutions, business, governmental, social institutions. The time is today. Mm-hmm. So all of these shifts that we need to make as individuals, as a society, as human beings, the time is today.
Yeah. And we can start really small. Like, we don't have to necessarily go out and change the entire world by the end of the week. Just think about your own context. Like, even in 5 days, if we think about what's on your to-do list, what are we doing? What can you do? Where can you make choices that are going to move you toward your goal, even if it's one small thing? I love the idea of actionable items on your to-do list, actionable goals. What are 5 things you can do? Or let's say 2 things you can do in the next 48 hours that's going to move you closer to what you want to be doing, closer to your vision for your future. It doesn't have to be everything all at once. I think that can feel really overwhelming to people and can shut people down. And then they kind of revert back to whatever inertia they're in. I think just having the big vision in mind, but also kind of bringing it down to earth of like, okay, this is where I am right now. In 2 weeks, this is what I think I can accomplish. In a month, this is, these are, a couple things I can do. In 3 months, I want to see myself over here. And again, without necessarily shutting everything else down, it can be a concurrent process.
These processes are not individuated. They are together. Mm-hmm. They are one. Jane, I cannot thank you enough for your time today and your willingness to share your wisdom and voice with us. I'm really grateful to you for today.
It's a total pleasure to talk to you always, Patrick.
Yes.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Absolutely. And to those of you who are watching and listening, remember, we all have a voice. Use yours wisely.